What's the story, guys, and welcome to another Irish Media Watch. Sorry it took so long to put a vid up, but every time I wanted to do this, something else happened. So I just said I'd hold off to the longest just to see if I could actually get the end of two of these stories. The story of the week is the historic presidential election, or rather the spoiled vote from the historic presidential election, which is now undeniably the only thing that really mattered about that whole affair. Which is enraging the lovies because they still want to make it all about Catherine. But when you look at the reaction of Simon Harris and Micheál Martin, it is blindingly obvious that somebody down in those count centres managed to give them a really good, appropriate approximation of what was coming through on those spoil votes. And it was not pleasant for them. Because we are seeing massive volte faces on a whole host of policies that were sacrosanct even the week before. I mean, Micheál Martin is now saying there's too many people coming into the country and we need to do something about illegal immigrants. Absolutely enraging people in the mainstream media, like Matt Cooper, for instance, who I'll come to later. But it's literally gobsmacking to see it. I think it pretty much all started off with Ben Scanlon asking Simon Harris outside of Dáil, pretty much kicked off this whole discussion about immigration. And it's literally shocking to sheer bare-faced cheek that these guys to be able to say what they're saying now. When 2 weeks ago, if anyone else had said that, if I'd have said it, you'd listen to this, we'd have been all far-right racists. I haven't seen a politician steal another politician's clothes this much since Fianna Fáil ripped off all the policies of the PDs back in the 90s. Now, whether he'll actually act on what he's saying is another thing, but I think they got a fair scare. Because as one of the commentators pointed out on the radio today, that 200,000 plus votes, that's more than all the people that voted for the Social Democrats and Labour put together. So just think of all those seats in Dáil filled with people who are not establishment lackeys and gunning for Micheál and Simon. There's actually a slim possibility here we could be looking at a Denmark situation. The only reason why Denmark doesn't have a far-right wing is because the centrists in there just said, yeah, what's going on here with immigration is mental, we'll clamp down on it. And indeed, Denmark has some of the most restrictive practices when it comes to immigration in the entire EU. And we're actually starting to put on it. I was listening to the radio today, I think it was Morning Ireland, and they're actually talking about charging asylum seekers for staying in their accommodation. This is the type of stuff that the Danes got up to. Because they used to just come in and take basically everything off them when they come into the country. Say, if you're going to stay here in an asylum seeker, you're going to keep yourself in the luxury that you're accustomed to. We ain't paying for it. And like I said, this is winding up people knowing. Like, I'm a big fan of the Path to Power podcast that Ivan Yates and Matt Cooper do. Well, did. More on that later. I'd encourage you to watch the last episode that they put up because Matt Cooper was fuming. I mean, like, he was quietly steaming like I have never seen anyone before. And his comments on these points was to say that was given into populism, that we shouldn't be listening to the mob and that we should do what's right. Now, the very interesting thing about that is that Matt never tells you where his source of what right comes from, what the foundation of that morality is. Because I'm pretty sure they're Judeo-Christian when it comes to him. And you strip that out, all you're left with is what's law. And that can send you down some really, really nasty paths. Which brings me on to the story of my thumbnail that you've got in the video today. The fallout of the revelation that Ivan Yates was actually advising Gavin in relation to media performances in the debates and how he never told anyone about it. It's become this somewhat quiet, bizarre story that the media is absolutely obsessed with. It resulted in Ivan being sacked from the Path to Power podcast, which is ran by Matt Cooper, and a bunch of hit pieces in the Examiner and in the Indo. Fiona Sheehan in particular, yesterday on Morning Ireland, got extraordinarily bent out of shape. Starts going on about threats to our democracy again. And how the listening public had a right to know that he was getting money off Fianna Fáil to advise Gavin. While at the same time, the biggest story that was connected to was telling Fine Gael to tell Heather Humphreys to smear the bejesus out of Catherine Connolly. I think they're trying to imply that that was actually some sort of Fianna Fáil tack to actually do in the Fine Gael candidate. But either way, at the end of the day, it turns out all he actually gave was like 4 hours speech and debate lessons to Gavin, and I think an hour or two to the taoiseach as well, and maybe 1 or 2 other ministers. Hardly the stuff to win elections. I mean, certainly not up there with the misled tweet from Pat Kenny years ago from Sinn Féin. But Baker got really bent out of shape over it, which is hilarious to listen to. I think the funniest thing is this has been rolling on for a couple of days now, and Ivan Yates is just not saying anything to the media, and it's really winding them up. All they've got from him is no comment. What gets me is, though, I'm trying to figure out the moral stance here. Half the bloody media end up working for the government, either as a government department or as a representative of a political party down the road. So what's Fiona Sheehan and co trying to say in all this? We know they're compromised. That's why nobody listens to them anymore. I mean, one of the reasons I've got a soft spot for Ivan is that He's actually the exemplar of what's wrong with our entire system. He's a guy who was Minister for Agriculture, who ends up going into broadcasting, and now last I heard he's in property development. So that's like the complete trifecta of conflicts of interests. Nothing he's doing is illegal, but it does compromise you when you're going to be talking about certain things. And the reality is, half the lads that work with Fionn Sheaton or Matt Cooper are going to end up doing similar things anyway. So I'm kind of wondering if they're just giving out that they didn't get the gig themselves. It is sad that Ivan's gone from that podcast because he was the only thing that made it listenable. I actually tuned into it just to basically get the other side, for want of a better term, from the extreme leftist view of events that are going on. And you can't get much more extreme left than Matt Cooper. I mean, Jesus, he was so demoralised with what happened with the presidential campaign that he decided the Irish people shouldn't be allowed to actually vote in this, and we should just install the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court instead. I mean, I used to have time from back in the day when I was listening to The Last Word on the radio, but mother of God, he has lost the plot. I mean, he is one step away from joining the Communist Chinese Party. There's not a podcast goes by that he talk about you have that only the entitled people should be allowed to stand for election and not the great unwashed. And that you need to be qualified to be things like a TD or a minister or a president. Completely missing the point that the only qualification that you need is a mandate for the people or a vote. Ivan's a bit of a raconteur, so he would always push back on this nonsense. And I got a great laugh out of his response when he heard about the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court getting the gig. He said, Jesus, have you seen what that guy's decided? Basically saying he's the last fecker we should put in the job. I am kind of interested to see who he's going to replace him with, because Cooper needs somebody to balance himself out, because you can't just have a show with him being just mentally left all the time. I mean, his response in the last episode about how the riots that kicked off after that 10-year-old child was raped, you know, was terrible because he lives next door to like 3 or 4 migrants and they're lovely people. Really does illustrate the intellectual titan we're dealing with. But to be honest with you, with the absolute scouring that the media has gone through, I can't think of anyone else who can get in to balance themselves out. You might even have to end up looking for Hooky or somebody. But at his age, I don't think George gives a feck anymore. I mean, the whole thing does illustrate the paucity or diversity of thought that they actually do have in the mainstream media now. Apparently Ivan was going to chuck it in after the new year anyway, so I presume he's got somebody lined up, so it'd be interesting to see who ends up going on that podcast. And watching the squirming of the Fianna Fáiles and the Fianna Gaels over all these revelations is fun to see. About the only other issue that catch my eye this morning was listening to Morning Ireland, and they were talking about this survey that's going out to secondary school kids. Well, specifically to their parents, and to find out whether they want their kids to go to an Educate Together school or to a Catholic school. RTE seems to be mortally offended by the notion that 90% of our schools are still Christian and Catholic. And they were making a big deal out of some notion I've heard it. I think 30% of all kids in their parents aren't married, apparently. And this seems to be some cohort that they seem to think they can ever try and push the notion of get more diversity in our schools, which basically means secular. The thing is, though, I don't think this is the win they think it is, because I've got nieces and nephews. They're living with their partners. They've got multiple kids, and they're sending their kids to Catholic schools, and that's where they want to send them. They've been with their partners for years, and they're not married. Which in the eyes of RTE, I presume, means they're godless. But the simple truth is, they have to make the same decision that an awful lot of other people is, which is, am I going to blow a lot of money on a wedding, one day, a big party, admittedly a special occasion, but, you know, it'll be over in a shot? Or am I going to buy a house where I can live with my partner and raise a family? And shock horror, they decided to buy the gaff first. I presume down the road they're going to get married at some stage anyway, even if it's just for the legal guarantees that you get in relation to inheritance. But no ordinary person with a brain in their head will blow 30,000-40,000 on a wedding when they can use 30,000-40,000 as a down payment on a home. Particularly in this environment. So it's going to be very interesting to see when this survey comes back to the government so we can find out what the stats are. I have a feeling it's not going to work out in the favour the way they think it will. Because a lot of people don't like woke. And while it's undeniable that it's in our schools, if you're in a Christian or Catholic school, at least you got some sort of bulwark against it. It was a shameless bit of propaganda on RT's part though, because they actually started interviewing kids and asking them how they felt about being left out of things like communions and confirmations, because they weren't part of that culture. Anyone else would say to the kids that it's just a rite of passage from our culture and it doesn't diminish you in the least. But not these lads. They want to use kids as a bludgeon to hit you over the head with emotionally. Like I said, not a big story, but RT every now and again do drop in these little testers, as I like to call them, for their woke agenda. And like I said, in this occasion, it shows you how they're perfectly willing to use children for propaganda purposes, just like the commies did. Mind you, not unless they've been raped by an illegal immigrant who shouldn't be in the country, then that gets buried quicker than you can say the link with government departments. So that's it, guys. Catch you next time and hope you enjoyed yourself. Bye-bye.